So welcome. This is the wonderful Houdini exhibition, which is now at the Jewish Museum in San Francisco, and it's my pleasure to take you through it. I am not a historian in any way. I love Houdini, Houdiniania. I collect Houdini. I read everything I can on him. I've studied him, and as a magician, I think I have a bit of a perspective on some of his points of view and the way he viewed life and spiritualism and some of those things. So it's going to be my pleasure to take you on an exclusive look through what I think is the most exciting magic exhibition that has ever been staged. So come on, let's go. All right, so let's begin with Houdini's beginnings. Born in Appleton, Wisconsin, he's a Hungarian Jewish descent, and these two collections here, these are early photographs of Houdini. Houdini as a kid, Houdini's father. On the other side, you're going to see Houdini's diaries. And this is the first time they've ever been on public display. It's from the collection of Dr. Bruce Averbook. And they've got it open to a very unique page. And this is the page in which Houdini reflects on losing his dad. He lost his dad early at about 18 years old. And this made him very close to his mother. In fact, it was an obsession for him for her life, her entire life. He did most of the things in his life to either achieve fame or to please his mother. And so you can see in these wonderful journal entries in his own hand. Now, we're going to talk a little bit as we go on about Houdini's ego. He had quite an ego, deservedly so, but an ego nonetheless. And even in his journal entries, his most intimate writings to himself, he was a bit of an egomaniac. And so we'll see that as we go on. This is a collection of the books Houdini wrote. Now, as I said, Houdini came from modest beginnings. He was not an educated man, and he sort of felt bad about this and spent most of his life trying to make up for it. He surrounded himself by learned people, and he liked to think of himself as one. So he authored all of these books. It's very interesting to know that when Houdini was asked to list his occupation, he never said magician. He would list 2 and sometimes 3 things. Author was always first, then escape artist, and then finally magician. So you can see how he viewed himself, and we'll come back to this when we talk about his death, but he really did think of himself, or want to be thought of, as a scholar and a learned man and a writer, which explains the books. Now, of all the books he wrote, the one to me is the most interesting is this one. This is a beautiful copy of The Unmasking of Robert Houdin. When Houdini was a child, Eric Weiss was his given name. Houdin, Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, was this French magician, unbelievable French magician, in my mind the greatest magician of all time. And Robert Houdin had a memoirs book, and in it he explained all of these amazing tales and things that he did. Well, at the height of his fame, Houdini decided it wasn't just enough for him to be the most famous magician alive, but he had to be the best magician of all time. And he wrote a book that is looked at today as the biggest blemish in Houdini's career. He wrote a book essentially knocking off the pedestal the man that he once admired enough to make his namesake. Weiss became Houdini, which is Houdin with an extra I on it, in tribute to Robert Houdin. So when he wrote this book, knocking Houdin off the pedestal, claiming that he lied, that he embellished, that he wasn't the magician history remembered him as, it was a very controversial thing. It was a book detested by magicians then and now, and it remains an enigma in his otherwise outstanding career. So this is a bust of Houdini. This comes from the Museum of the City of New York. A very similar one adorns his grave, which is just outside the city. Now, unfortunately, because of the timing of Houdini's death on Halloween and the annual seances they do to bring him back, it's had a weird consequence, and that is throughout history, particularly in the last 30 years, his grave site has been the terrible victim of vandalism. People break into the cemetery and they have tried to steal the bust, break it off of the stone bench that surrounds it. And David Copperfield very kindly helped set up an endowment with the Society of American Magicians, which is an organization Houdini himself was the first president of, and they now guard over the gravesite. What's interesting is that the current board has a really cool strategy of protecting the gravesite. on Halloween, it's nuts. I mean, there's so many people that come, and so what they do is, to really pay respects to Houdini, they celebrate it on the Jewish calendar in his birthday instead of the Gregorian calendar, October 31st. And in doing so, they're able to control the traffic and watch it much better. And when a magician dies, magicians have a really cool ceremony that they do called the Broken Wand Ceremony. It's a beautiful thing in which it's sort of non-denominational. It's not Jewish or Christian or for anybody, and it can be for anyone who is a good member in good standing of a magic organization. You take a wand and you break it. And of course, the wand being the magician's symbol is power. And when you break that wand, it turns a very powerful symbol into a meaningless object, and that is either given to the family or buried with them. So that's what the Broken Wand Ceremony is about. This, to me, is really exciting. Houdini was famous for his escapes. For the public, he was more famous for his escapes than he was for his magic. But he had a way of combining the mysterious with the dangerous. It seemed to touch a nerve, and nowhere is that more evident than here in a trick called simply the needles, or sometimes called the East Indian needle trick. And in effect, Houdini would swallow 20 to 30 real stainless steel sharp needles. Then he would swallow a length of thread. Once that was verified by audience members that it had been swallowed and ingested, he would cough them up and pull the needles on the thread. And if you want a close-up of what that looks like, you can look here. Now, what's interesting about this picture that scholars have been puzzled over for a long time is that if you look at the needles that he actually used here, they're much smaller than these needles. Well, I perform this illusion myself. It's an extremely dangerous trick. Very few magicians do it. But I can tell you one thing. There's no way Houdini did it with these needles. We have learned since that this is, of course, a publicity shot. And as you can see in the rest of the museum and this exhibition, they would often exaggerate the tricks, make them larger than life, make these needles thick and sharp and this long. You can't even swallow a needle that long, let alone cough it back up. But that, of course, is for show. These are the actual needles Houdini used. Houdini was largely known for his escapes, but truthfully, most of his escapes were publicity stunts. They were done outside in harbors to get people to come to his magic shows. So this is why he would be seen upside down with a straitjacket or doing underwater escapes, bridge jumps. But in 1908, he had a brilliant idea to bring the major escapes to the stage. And this was the one that he brought. This is the Milkcan escape. It's an original Houdini illusion, and this is the original Milkcan. He would go inside the can, so only his head was emerged. And then he would do something brilliant. And as I'm sure you've heard by so far, Houdini wasn't really respected by his peers for his skills in magic, but he was a brilliant promoter and he was a brilliant presenter. So what he did was this is so smart. He would say to everybody in the audience, I have here the biggest stopwatch in the world, and they would bring out a big clock. And he would say, I want all of you to help me warm up my lungs by holding your breath for a minute with me. And he would get everybody in the audience to hold their breath. The timer would start, and he would go submerge himself into the can. Everybody tries to hold their breath. 30 seconds go by, and they learn it's hard. He comes up after a minute, they kick the can, and now it's brilliant, because what has he done? He hasn't shown you that what he's doing is impossible, like most magicians. He's shown you that what he's doing is difficult and real. And that is a way that everybody, remember, even if there were 3,000 people in the crowd, could understand and identify on a very intimate level the real danger that he was attempting. So this is how the illusion would work. He would say, after a moment of meditation, I will now hold my breath much longer. And he would resubmerge. 6 assistants would place the top on the can and then lock the 6 padlocks on the side. A small curtain was placed around it. This was to protect the secret of his illusion, which remains a secret to this day. And then the clock would start ticking. After a minute, almost everybody in the audience couldn't hold their breath. After 2 minutes, the skeptics were scared. At the 3-minute mark, the theater manager would come out with an axe in his hand, looking very confused, like this had never happened before. And of course, it happened every night, the same exact way. This is Houdini's brilliance with orchestrating a play and playing with your emotions. At the 4-minute mark, everybody in the audience was shouting, "Mercy! Mercy for Mr. Houdini!" And just as he was about to break open that can with an axe, Houdini would emerge from behind the curtain, soaking wet, to thunderous applause. They ate it up. They loved it. Then they'd whisk away the curtain, and the padlocks were still locked. It was as if he melted through the side. And even though Houdini wasn't claiming to be real, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and other spiritualists at the time actually attributed it to his supernatural skills that would allow him to melt through the side. And this is what spurred on that phase of his career, which is coming up here in the next part of the exhibit. Now, we don't know how Houdini did it, but we know that he wasn't injured ever in the performance of this trick. But I can't say the same about a man named Genesta, and I talk about this in my talk tonight. A Houdini imitator named Genesta attempted the Milkcan escape in 1930, 4 years after Houdini's death. But what Genesta didn't know is that as his crew was unloading the can, they dropped it. Now, we don't know how Houdini did it, but we do know that Genesta did it with a trapdoor lid, a lid that even when locked, you could escape through, right around here, like a double lip. When they dented the can, they stopped the method of escape. The trapdoor wouldn't open. Genesta didn't know this until he was underwater, inside the can with the padlocks locked. No way to shout for help, no way to signal what had happened. It took his wife, who was watching the trick from the wings, 3 minutes before she realized something had gone wrong. She ushered all the assistants in to help unlock the can. But of course, remember, the way the trick is supposed to work, they never have to unlock the padlocks. They couldn't remember which keys went to which locks. So they got mixed up and they lost another precious minute. By the time they unlocked the can, they opened it, Genesta lived only long enough so that they could explain to him how he had been killed. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Houdini in a metaphorical sense. Who is Houdini? Houdini is 5'3". Although born in America, he's considered at this time period an outsider, Hungarian. He's an immigrant at a time when more immigrants were coming into the country than ever before. He's a minority, he's Jewish. So already you have a lot of things that people in that time viewed as stacked against you. He was an outsider, he wasn't thought of as American. And yet, somehow, he became America's first superstar. And he really was. That's not really even a debatable statement. He was America's first superstar because although there were people who were famous actors on the stage and later in silent pictures, they were famous for portraying other people, other powerful people. Houdini was famous for who he was. And who was he? He's this small Jewish immigrant, but chains can't hold him. He can escape from anything. That's an unbelievable metaphor given the time period. This isn't a time when most people are feeling repressed. Most people are feeling like there's a ceiling to how high they can rise. Here's a man without education, without any money. It's the ultimate rags to riches story. Now, something else. Look at this picture. There's no date on this picture, but I'm going to put Houdini at about 28, 29, 30 years old. So right at the turn of the century, 1900, 1905. He's depicted almost naked. He's wearing some kind of loincloth that's blocked just by the shadows of his hands, we hope. But here he is, naked, and he's allowed to have this picture appear when he's performing for kids. Think of the time period. If you watch Boardwalk Empire, you know the propriety of the time. It's very rigid. It's very formal. And yet, he's allowed to be depicted with no shirt on, in jails posed with no clothes on. That's the power of Houdini. It transcended culture. It transcended rules and regulations of what was accepted. He was Houdini, and he was larger than all of it. Now, you wonder, how did he do it? How did he do all this stuff? And I'm reminded of one of my favorite movies. You know this movie, Catch Me If You Can? Frank Abagnale impersonates a pilot, a doctor, all these crazy things, and there was always a catch. There was always a gimmick. How did he escape? Well, that question to me is sort of like when they asked Frank Abagnale, how did you pass the bar in Alabama? How did you do it? And at the end of the movie, Tom Hanks, who asked the question, he says to Tom Hanks, I studied and I passed. And that's a little bit like Houdini with escapes. There isn't just one secret. Houdini was a master escape artist. He invented the genre for all purposes. And you can see a collection here of the leg irons and the irons that he used with his hands. And he learned a lot about these. He knew how to escape. He knew how to regurgitate keys. He was a master of escape. So although the magic that he did had a secret, those things were to a degree very real. So, you're Houdini. By this time, you've achieved more fame than probably was ever even thought possible for a magician. He's one of the most famous figures alive, but something's happened. He's getting older, right? He's famous for being a dashing young immigrant magician, making these escapes with young assistants, showing off the physicality of his body, but now he's bordering 50 years old. He's not quite as quick on his feet, and he realizes that the last part of his career will not be as dynamic physically as the first part. So what do you do? Where do you go from here? It's the same question great actors and great singers ask when they achieve so much, but now have to reinvent themselves. Well, if you're Houdini, you go on a crusade against an emerging religion, spiritualism. And I call spiritualism a religion on purpose. It's looked at today as a cult or sort of a phase in history. But at that time period, people believed in spiritualism as a faith. And he was very close to his mother, as I've told you. When she died, he wanted more than anything, like all of us do when we lose somebody, to get in contact with her. And there was a particular incident in which he was told that he would, and he was told had made contact with his mother, and it was a scam. He realized very quickly that the same techniques he was using to deceive the public, they were using to deceive people for real. And he went on a crusade against spiritualism. Now, at that time, photography wasn't Photoshop like we have now, so when you do a double exposure and have an apparition appear, they thought that was an apparition. So he would do photos like this to the press to show how these things could be faked. As you see on this wall over here, he did lots of experiments showing how these things could be faked. His show would be into 3 parts: escapes, magic, and a spiritualist expose. He would do seances and then explain how they were done. He would attend famous seance meetings and then announce himself as Houdini and expose the mediums for what they were, just frauds. So let's talk about Houdini's death. As I told you before, he's now over 50 years old. And he's tired. He's tired mentally and physically. He's tired mentally because his wife, the love of his life, Bess, is in hospital in New York. He's far away from her on tour. He wants to be with her. He's made his dent. He's achieved everything and more that he wanted to achieve. And he's also physically tired. He's physically tired because he injured himself and has a bad ankle right now. It's excruciatingly painful for him to get up every night and do these full 3-part shows that he's giving. So we go to Montreal. And it's after a show in Montreal that he's very tired, stressed about his wife, worried about his ankle, that he's backstage in a robe. And he's being sketched by a Jewish student at nearby McGill University, a guy named Smilovich, who would later become the eyewitness to some very strange events. In walks a man named J. Gordon Whitehead, another student from nearby McGill. And let's get some heights set here. Houdini was 5'3" about right here. J. Gordon Whitehead was taller than me, about 6'4". He came in and approached Houdini from the right. He was standing, Houdini was sitting, and they talked for a time. And Houdini, as always, was boasting about his muscles, and he invited the kids to feel his forearm and his bicep, and he said, that's where it comes from, that's where you need good strength to make these escapes. And then J. Gordon Whitehead said, Mr. Houdini, is it true you can absorb any blow above the waist? And indeed, this was something Houdini often advertised that he could do. He would flex his muscles and then let somebody punch him. But on this night, before Houdini could even answer, J. Gordon Whitehead, as Houdini turned to stand up, delivered 3 severe blows to his abdomen. After that, according to eyewitnesses, several successive blows until Houdini was on his knees saying, that's quite enough, very meekly. Now, as the public would soon find out, Houdini was already suffering from appendicitis. They thought it was probably only a matter of time, although he didn't know it until this appendix ruptured. Many believe this trauma to the stomach caused that appendix to rupture immediately. But Houdini was a proud guy and he wouldn't seek medical attention. But 4 days later, on a stage in Detroit with a temperature of 104 degrees, he collapsed. And he was taken to a nearby hospital where he engaged in a now mythic conversation with his surgeon, a man named Dr. Kennedy. And whether or not it happened exactly like this or not, this says a lot about how Houdini viewed himself and his own mortality. "You know, I always wanted to be a doctor," Houdini said, meekly pulling the surgeon in, "but I just never could. I've always regretted that." "Why, Mr. Houdini," Dr. Kennedy said, "that is the most absurd thing I've heard today. Here you are, the greatest magician and entertainer of your time. You make untold thousands happy. You have countless amounts of money, and I am just an ordinary dub of a surgeon eking my way through life." "That may be true," Houdini said, "but you actually do things for people, while I, in almost every respect, am a fake." And Houdini died that night, Halloween, 1926. So what is Houdini's legacy? Well, when I look at this, I see something much more than a straitjacket escape, something he invented and pioneered. I see the imagery of a small man, a Jewish man, a minority, a man who came from nothing and was able to escape from anything. Chains couldn't hold him back. He couldn't be restrained. He was, in a sense, the first superhero. And that's the tour.